Hello and good afternoon. We are here today speaking on conflict. This is from the Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn. And today I, Angela Brown, am here with Omuugn, and we are going to unpack some of the interesting ideas about conflict. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, conflict, why do we want conflict in our lives? Well, we don't necessarily want it, but it's going to show up. One of the things I learned in acting is that a scene does not move forward unless there's conflict. The reason, check this out. The reason we show up and we watch films and TV shows is because there's a conflict. And we hang on to the story because we want to see how the person inside the movie or the TV show is going to resolve that conflict. Okay, great. So that's not so much different than real life. And today we're talking from the Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn on pages 153 to pages 156. And today we're going to unpack conflict, and we're going to find out how in our personal lives we can use that to propel our actions forward, and then also how we resolve them and make our lives more meaningful. So please help me welcome Omuugn. Hey Omuugn, how are you today?
Oh, great. It's good to be here this morning. It's a nice, crisp 31 degrees. Well, actually, it's about 29 degrees in this little hamlet that I live in. But it's a beautiful, beautiful winter day, and it looks like a good one.
That is so cold. I just don't know how you deal with that being so cold.
That's why
That
not very many people live here.
Well, that would be a conflict in my life. I'm not a fan of the cold. So tell us, conflict. Conflict shows up in all different forms in our lives. And you wrote about this in your book for a reason. Share with me, if you will, what your reason was for addressing the topic of conflict.
Well, the purpose in the book, of course, was to identify all of the characteristics and genetic traits that we have as individuals. And conflict was really one of those. How we deal with conflict, how we view it, how we react to it. And whenever we have an opposing interest or a need or a goal that doesn't pan out the way we want it to, we enter into a world of conflict. And we usually think of conflicts as between people because everyone has their own belief system, and people see things very, very differently. Everyone has different values, beliefs, opinions, resources, perceived threats, all different kinds of psycho, the way we look at things, the way we respond to things, like a spider, or there are different things that frighten people, and those same things would not bother other people at all. So it's just, anything in your world can cause a conflict. And like you said in the beginning, conflict is sort of a natural and inevitable part of the flow of our life. We're going to run into conflicts all of the time. And as you mentioned, also, we're looking for win-win solutions. How can we resolve conflict so that our life is peaceful and enjoyable and pleasant, and we look excitedly forward to each day?
So I'm curious, what is the difference between real conflict and imagined or perceived conflict? I know that in a lot of people's lives, they're fearful of things that, I don't know, maybe really don't exist, or it's hinging on something that happened 20, 30 years ago.
Well, maybe the best place to start in our pursuit of this idea is conflict begins with ourselves. If we don't have peace within ourselves, if we don't have mechanisms to deal with things that don't go our way. For example, we all have plans. We had a plan to have this program this morning. And what if something happened that we couldn't have the program? Or what if there were challenges that I remember we were having one program and we had technical difficulties and we couldn't get the equipment to to operate properly. And it can be little things like that you don't have. Usually we think of conflict as fighting and quarreling and big things. But whenever you experience a negative emotion, if you're frustrated, if you're angry, if you're disappointed, uh, all of those have a basis in there's something in your personality and your belief system that's conflicted. That's why you feel that negative energy. And so another aspect that we need to consider is assumptions. We don't have all of the information about all of the variables, about all of the things that are happening to us in our life. And so we have a tendency to make assumptions about how things are going to turn out, how our plans are going to turn out. And I don't know if you remember, but as the family was developing, I came to understand that life is a progression of plan B rather than plan A. There will always be something that you didn't count on. For example, someone will ask me to do a job around the house. They'll say, how long will that take? And my response now is, it will take much longer than either one of us assume that it will, because there will always be unexpected things. I remember we had a kitchen in a house that we lived in before we settled where we are now. And the kitchen sink was really quite low. And there were cupboards that came down, and the cupboards were too low because the sink was low, and they just kind of, someone lived there who was really short, I guess. And the kitchen was designed around someone who was really short. And so I'm rather tall, and many members in my family are rather tall. So one day we decided to move the cabinets up. And we took the cabinets off the wall, and the ladies in our family said, I like it better without the cabinets there. Let's just leave the cabinets there. But the sink is so low, why don't we raise the sink? Well, before that was over, we had repaired the sink and put a new floor in, and that interacted with the way the entrance to another room was. And so we ended up changing the entrance to the other room and then working on the other room, and just making that one change on the cabinets and how long it would take ended up in about a 2-week project that cost hundreds and hundreds of dollars and lots of man hours, and a lot of things were involved that we had no idea when we began the project.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the way plans are a lot of times. We sort of have a way of looking at things the way they're going to turn out, but they don't turn out that way. So how do you respond to this, all of these changes that are happening in your house when you had just planned for a little one? How we deal with things like that, how we react to change, the personal attitude. For example, if I'm a cheerful person, if my plans change, do I maintain that cheerfulness, or do I become kind of grumpy and sullen because my plans changed? You see, my personality should be consistent, and if plans change, I should realize the plans will usually always change. I know we were planning to come out and visit you in North Carolina, and you girls started making those plans like 2 months ahead of time. And they were asking my opinion about the trip. And I said, the plans are going to change so many times between now and that 2-month period. Ask me about a day or two before the trip is planned, and I'll give you my opinion, because I know that things are going to change. Everything is always in a state of change, except those first 3 laws that we haven't talked about yet. So anyway, we need to make assumptions carefully. And we need to gather more information than we usually do before we make assumptions. Our plans are going to be better. We're going to have different things to work with if we plan better, if we take the time to invest into how our life is going to lay out, than if we just start flying by the seat of our pants all of the time. Because that can be very, very frustrating. And if two people are living in the same space, a married couple, oh my word. We talked about different traits and characteristics in other shows leading up to this one. And the characteristics and traits of people are really different. For example, say one person is a hoarder and the other person is OCD, and they're living together. They're both frustrated all of the time because one person likes a really casual lifestyle where you just throw things down anywhere. And the other person, they're not happy unless everything is put away and everything looks really, really organized. And so if you don't know how to communicate, you can have lots and lots of conflicts. So there are things like your attitude, how quickly you become angry over things, how you respond to challenges and changes, whether or not you're a cheerful disposition or not, and your communication skills. Those are some of the programs that we've had in the past. And those traits and characteristics deal with how we respond to conflict in our lives. And so as you identify a trait, it's important that you analyze the trait and then really apply it to your life and to see how that trait applies to how you deal with things. Because there is physical and mental and emotional and spiritual realities that we deal with. And we mature at all of those different things on different levels at different times. Someone might be physically an adult, but emotionally a child because of certain circumstances, or a child in a certain situation. So we have to take a lot of things into consideration. Conflict doesn't have to be negative. Conflict can be, well, it's just a change that's taking place.
If we go back to the scenario where you were talking earlier about the kitchen and you were going to raise the kitchen cabinets or remove them or whatever, is there a way to future proof that so that as you are about to take the project on, you can look at all the different possible scenarios and say, hey, wait a second, if I move the cabinets, that means I'm also going to have to move the sink, and that might affect the flooring or the floorboards underneath it or the way the rest of the kitchen is situated, or the cabinets might be too short, which is going to mean that I need to buy new cabinets that go underneath the sink, or some, is there a way to troubleshoot and figure out what could possibly throw a monkey wrench into your plans? And then how do you plan for that so that you can kind of face those challenges or those conflicts head on?
Well, the more that you communicate and plan together, the less conflict you're going to have. So if you're going to do something, you need to sit down and really analyze the situation. We're going to change the cabinet. Do I really like the height of the counter? Do I really like the flooring that's in this room? If we're going to make some changes, why don't we make some significant changes and make our room the way we prefer it to be?
Mm-hmm.
So the more you can do that in detail, the less conflict you're going to have, because you can sit down and communicate before the project begins instead of finding out that somebody doesn't like something. If you're going to put a new floor in, what kind of a floor are you going to put in?
Mm-hmm.
Some people like dark hues and some people like light hues. Some people like the natural wooden floors, and some people like the new materials that are available in construction today.
And if you're going to put in
So,
a new sink, how about a new faucet? And is this the time that we had a garbage disposal and all the different things that go along with that? How much is that going to cost?
oh, absolutely. In fact, the faucet on our sink was a faucet that no one liked. It was so low that you couldn't get pans in the sink to clean them. So when we redesigned the whole thing, we put in one of those great big tall water spouts for our kitchen sink, and we loved it. And so we would live with nothing else now. So yeah, the more planning and detail you can get before you make an assumption or implement your plan, the less conflict you're going to have.
So would you
Yeah,
say that moving forward with that same philosophy, that it's kind of like plan for the worst and try to troubleshoot and play devil's advocate and look at it from every different angle? Because if you're just really optimistic and like, hey, I got this really great attitude, it's possible that, like you said, you could run into thousands of dollars on expenses and repairs because you were just playing Pollyanna and you were really optimistic, but not really looking at it from every different angle. I don't want to be like negative, but is it possible that you could say this could malfunction and this could malfunction and I need to brace myself for this? I need to plan for this. And if I unhook all the water pipes and everything, and then there's a water pipe that bursts, here's how we're going to repair that. Here's how much money we've budgeted for plumbing issues. Here's how much we've budgeted for floor issues and what have you, so that you can kind of brace for impact.
we had a session on common sense here not too long ago, and a lot of people have different levels of common sense. And if you have experience in plumbing, and if you have experience in electrical, and if you have experience in being a handyman, putting in flooring and doorways and windows and all kinds of things like that, you have a lot better insight into some of your potential problems or challenges that you're going to face. For example, if you're going to change the height of your counter, you are going to have plumbing issues. You're going to have
Mhm.
to alter your plumbing because your plumbing is, especially if it's an older home, it's solid plumbing that has to be redone. Some of the newer plumbing, they use the Plex plumbing, and it's flexible, and so sometimes you can get around issues. But yeah, the more detail you can get into and see things eye to eye, and the more experience you have in all of the different areas, you can use your common sense to make better decisions, better choices, how things have to happen chronologically as you go through the project. Sometimes you get through a project and you realize that this should have been done first. And now,
Mhm.
if you're going to do that, now you have to take apart something you've already done and redo it. And so, the more information you have to begin with, the better off you're going to be. You'll always have challenges. Uh, I have found that it's very seldom that a project goes just like you think it will, or easier. Usually, you're going to have challenges, and everyone in the family, everyone involved, is going to respond to what's happening differently because of their experiences. While the kitchen is torn up for 2 weeks, somebody might be really on edge because they're trying to fix meals and keep the family running, but their area is just torn apart. And so we have to be sensitive to other people's reaction to what's happening, or there could be conflict. And people could scream at each other and be frustrated, and all different kinds of negative emotions could come out. But if you're empathetic with people and you put your arm around them and say, hey, we're in the middle of this project and things are going to get better. Yeah, we're going to be challenged here for a day. Let's pretend like we're camping, in fact. Let's pretend that we're out in the forest, and things are not like they are at home. And this will be a fun adventure, a fun experience. And you can turn the whole thing into something positive. So, yeah, we have to just plan to the best that we can, make assumptions based on the best information that we can obtain before whatever it is starts. And like I said, it depends on our own traits and characteristics. if I've decided to be a cheerful person, no matter what happens, I'm going to try to maintain that cheerfulness. If things turn out differently than I think they will, instead of becoming angry and frustrated, I will just say, well, golly, that didn't work out like we thought it would. And we laugh about it and go on.
This happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I did this exact same scenario, but I myself am the one that created my own conflict. And I didn't create it with the intention of creating conflict. It just kind of turned out that way. But in 2023, one of the things that I decided is that I was going to give up single-use plastics, which are those little individual plastic water bottles that we buy. And I was going to go to something that was more like this, where I can just refill it again and again. And so in order to do that, I was going to buy a water filter that went underneath my sink, and then I could just use water out of my sink instead of buying bottled water. So I bought online a water filter, and I was just going to hook it up underneath my sink. That was the plan. And I did try to troubleshoot it by saying, what could go wrong? And do I need new plumbing? And how much is it going to cost? And all the things. And in my head, it was a really simple program where you just drill holes in the back of the counter and you hook them up to the existing water pipes and you're done. I got through that process of hooking it up, but when I went to connect it to the pipe on the sink, exactly what you mentioned, where it was older plumbing and the plumbing wasn't flexible and I needed a new piece of the plumbing. So I went to adjust the piece of the plumbing and I broke something on the sink. Then I was like, oh dear, I didn't expect for this to happen. So now I'm in the middle of a conflict where the sink was working. It was working until I monkeyed with it. And now I broke it. And now I have conflict. So how quickly can I get out of the conflict and how much is it going to cost me? And so I didn't want to tell my husband because I didn't want him to get upset. And like you said, upset the apple cart with other people in the house. So I called the plumber and I had him come out. I wasn't going to tell anybody. I was just going to pay for it and all the things. The plumber came out and he took one look at it and he said, that's going to be $812 for me to fix. And I was like, whoa, now I got even more conflict. And now I'm upset and it wasn't in the budget because a minute ago, the sink was working just fine before I broke it. And now to fix it, it's going to be $812. And I said, what does that mean? And the plumber said, well, I'm just going to install a whole new faucet. So I started thinking in my head, well, to install a whole new faucet, what does that mean? I think he's just going to unscrew the one that's there and he's going to plug in a new one, and a whole new faucet is going to cost, I don't know, somewhere around $100. So if I go to the hardware store and I buy a $100 faucet and I come back and I replace the one that I broke, then I can probably do that myself and I don't need to pay the plumber. So I paid the plumber for his visit and I sent him on his way without fixing my sink. And then I hurried and I went down to the hardware store and I bought a new faucet. And this was one of those moments, like what you said before, is the faucet that I have serving me. And also it was a faucet that was like really close to the edge where you go to put something underneath it and like the faucet is like right really close and you can't get water in it. So I just bought one of those big faucets that came over and it had the little edge that comes out and becomes a sprayer and all the things. And it was about $100. So I take it home. And lo and behold, technology has changed. I literally opened the faucet, took the one out, plugged the new one in. It didn't even require any tools. There was a little adapter thing that came with the new faucet. I installed it. It took about 5 minutes. And then I was able to plug in the water filter, hook it up, and we're good to go. So the whole thing was okay. But when I tried to do something different, I created the conflict. That I created even a bigger conflict when I broke the sink. And then I was trying to unravel that and fix it before my husband got home so that I could prevent even further conflict. So I went through several layers of conflict before I found a resolve. And I was optimistic through the whole thing, but I was kind of like, I wish none of that happened because it was $100 more than I was hoping to spend. And I created some unnecessary conflict and I wasted a bunch of time where I had to go out and buy another faucet and then try to put it in myself. And I watched a couple of YouTube videos in the meantime to make sure I was doing it the right way. So I didn't make even a bigger mess.
Well, those are all good examples. What could be a real negative experience, you can make it a positive experience. And not only that, but putting in the new sink, you learned a little bit about plumbing and how things work. And so your database got a little bit bigger, so that when you look at things and analyze things, you have more information to work with, which will decrease conflict in the future, no matter what might happen.
And I got clean water out of my tap now, so I felt like that was a win-win that came out of the weird situation.
Yeah, whenever you have any kind of a challenge or situation or conflict between people, you're always looking for win-win solutions. How can we make everything best for everyone involved? Everyone has a different belief system.
Mhm.
And so people are not going to see everything the same way. So we need to learn to negotiate. We need to learn to compromise. Uh, we can compromise on a lot of things without devaluing things that we really value. For example, we have moral codes, we have ethical codes. We've talked about universal laws and foundational principles. You don't want to alter those, but personal preferences, a lot of times we can change those without violating anything major. And so if we can compromise, then that's the best way to do it. Win-win solutions.
On another one of our shows here, you made a point that was really poignant, and I want to double back around to that today because I think it's really applicable in today's topic, where you mentioned that when you are at home with your family and somebody comes in and they want to do something, you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And 10 being this is really important to me. And if it's not very important to you, it's a 2, it's a 3. You're like, you can decide because it's really important to them. And I think picking your battles and saying, this one is really important to me, and letting yourself not win all 10 out of 10 battles, right? That's not necessary that anybody win all 10 out of 10. But I think when you mentioned that, how you say, hey, it's a 1 or a 2 to me, it's not important, and you let someone else win in one of those negotiation situations. What I think happens is when you do say, hey, this is a number 8, 9, or a 10 for me, that you're gonna have more credibility and they're gonna say, "Whoa, let me back off a little bit because dad doesn't always have to win and have it his way." So that the fact that he's fighting for this one, this must really mean something to him. And let's try to negotiate, in both directions. And I loved that. That was just an excellent way of setting the ground rules so that everybody can play by the same rules and let's take turns winning.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who are very, very, very egocentric. They want everything to be their way. Sometimes you'll have an employer that way, and they're in a position of power and authority, and they really enjoy exercising that. They like to micromanage and get into everybody's business and tell everybody how to do everything. And that creates a lot of conflict personality wise. Whereas some people can say, this is what I want done. And if you have a good way to do that, that's fine. Uh, let people be creative and find new ways of doing things, maybe better ways of doing things. So, yeah, other people are just as important as you are. And so if you find yourself to be sort of egocentric, it's time to take stock of some of your traits and characteristics, because other people are just as important as you are. And you need to be very, very considerate of other people emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, and physically. You want to create environments that people want to be in. And you can live your life so that you avoid most of the conflicts by just being aware and mindful of people and mindful of yourself. When when you're in your own home, you walk into a room, the room is like you really like it or it isn't. And if it isn't, you have a conflict. It doesn't have to be a terrible experience. You can just say, I don't really like this room. I think if I painted the room and changed the color, I would like it better, or I can do this, or I can do that. And you can alter things in a very pleasant, natural way without becoming frustrated or ornery about things. And before you repaint the room, it's good to if you're a family member, bring the family in and say, I think this room would look better a different color. And you can talk about colors and get other input into how you do things. And then you won't have someone, maybe they don't like the color that you would have painted the room. And so you would have created another conflict. So
I know that's true in my business. As my business has kind of taken some twists and turns, I've pulled my husband in and I've said, hey, I want to let you know that between my business and you always come first. And now I'm making a business decision. And so I want to bring you in on it because there will be twists and turns. There will be some conflict. There will be some surprises. There will be some nuances and changes that we're not experiencing right now. And so I want you to be on board as we go through this journey. And then every step along the way, as the weird twists and turns have happened, to keep him in the loop and to say, hey, wait a second, I just wanted to let you know one of those weird twists and turns just happened again. And I want to make sure that you're still on board. And it's been interesting because even though it was my conflict and it was sometimes self-created by decisions I made of hiring people or things that we decided to do in the business, I have to realize and appreciate that he's also affected by those changes and those decisions that I make. And so sometimes having him as a sounding board to help me walk through those scenarios, like what happens if this occurs, or what do we do when this happens, or this is the result of what we're headed towards right now. And so I think in order to resolve some conflict, it's important to be aware that it's coming. And sometimes we sit down and we're like, hey, we're headed like headed down a roller coaster. We're headed right straight down. And in a minute we might hit the curve and come back up again. But right now we're headed straight down, like hang on for the ride that we're about to experience.
Oh, absolutely. There are ways to resolve conflicts, and we've talked about some of them. One of the ways that we haven't talked about is there needs to be clarity and respect in the decisions that we make. The more, like with your employees, the more clear you can present what you want done, the better chance that you have that they're going to follow through and do what you want done the way you want to do it. We have a problem in that we all interpret words differently. And sometimes we can use words that other people will interpret a different way. And so we think we're communicating with people where in reality, they're getting a totally different message than we intend. So we have to make certain that we're on the same page, especially, I don't know why, but all of our conversations, we have to bring AI into it in some way because we're living in an AI world now. And more and more things are available to us, decision-making wise or information wise, than they have been in the past. So taking the time to utilize AI for clarity can be a really, really good thing. And another thing to think about is that, for example, as Americans, we like to buy things that are American made. And if we buy American made things, it spurs the production of things in America, and it creates jobs for people, and we can impact a lot of lives by the way we buy things. I was always kind of bewildered about how they could produce material for the dollar stores. Those materials were basically produced in foreign countries, and they would ship the materials over the oceans, and then they would transport the materials from the ports to sometimes distribution centers, and then from distribution centers to the dollar stores, and they could sell those products for $1. And a lot of things, if you were going to make it yourself, it would take time and it would take resources to make that. How can they make it in a foreign land and bring it all the way over here and go through all of these processes and still sell it for so cheap? And so we have a tendency to buy what's available cheap. And when we do that, we're sometimes buying things that are produced by child labor or people who are making $1 a day or $2 a day instead of $10 or $15 an hour. And so there are a lot of decisions that we make that impact the lives of a lot of different people. And sometimes we can encourage things like child labor to take place because we support those industries. And sometimes if we make decisions based on a different set of factors and values. For example, some of the changes that take place are we've gone from mass-produced things to organic things. And if you want to buy a chicken that ran around on the ground and ate bugs and pieces of grass, I found that those chickens are smaller than the chickens that you buy in the store. And they're more expensive than the chickens you buy in the store. And there's a way that they fatten chickens and do things with chemicals and hormones and injections to produce a product that you will buy because maybe it looks better. Maybe you think you're getting more value for your money if you buy something that costs 98 cents a pound rather than paying $7 or $8 a pound for something. So a lot of values are going back and forth all of the time, and that can create conflicts with between nations, the way products are produced, the way ecological things take place, where you preserve the natural surroundings that you live in. It used to be that companies would move into an area and just clean cut all of the trees down. You'd have a beautiful forest, and next week you'd go in there and it would just be bare land. And so people were conflicted because of that philosophy that you could just go in and destroy things for the value that the timber had on that particular piece of property. It takes years and years and years for a tree to grow. And we should be able to use trees and lumber, but we should do it in a way that enhances our ecology rather than tears it down. And so because of the protests and the way people interacted with that process, now a lot of companies, whenever they take a tree out, they'll put in 3 trees or they will plant 5 trees. And they're replenishing resources as they're utilizing them. So there are different ways that we can do things to avoid the conflict, to avoid the protests, to avoid people rising up in anger and causing this enmity between people and companies, between companies and nations, and nation to nation. We live in a world right now that's conflicted in so many ways. Protesters are protesting for everything you can imagine. Countries are literally fighting each other and battling. And to move to a totally different paradigm where it's just peaceful and loving and tranquil, and people are interacting in a positive way with each other, life could be so much different than it is. So
instead of hoping that the conflicts will be resolved out there by our votes and by our politicians, is it better to start with ourselves first and resolve the conflicts in our own inner lives first so that we are then able to permeate that in the world around us?
well, absolutely. We mentioned that in the beginning of this show today. Conflict really begins with ourselves and the traits that we have developed and the ways in which we have matured spiritually and emotionally and intellectually and physically. And there are a lot of things like people have a tendency to make New Year's resolutions, but how many follow through with those resolutions? It sounds really good when you say, well, I'm going to exercise this year. I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and I'm going to do all of these things. and 5 o'clock in the morning comes and you say, well, I'm really kind of tired. And so you don't do that. And you were going to lose weight last year, but you actually weigh a little bit more this year than you did last year. And so we find that a lot of the goals that we set are unrealistic, or we're unwilling to discipline ourselves to fulfill those things that we really want to do. I know that I have on my list to exercise every day, and yet some of my days are simply so busy that a day will go by and I will tend not to accomplish the things that I really wanted to accomplish.
I agree
So,
with you on that because I too find myself in that situation. And I discovered for myself that no one was going to show up to hold me accountable. When it comes to my sleep and my eating and my exercise, I myself am responsible for those things. Those are three things that I cannot outsource to anyone. I can hire as many employees as I want, but those are three things I cannot outsource: my nutrition, my exercise, and my sleep. And those are things that I myself am responsible for. And I discovered that in order to avoid conflict in my own personal life, I had to stand up to the plate and I had to say, hey, listen, I will be responsible for those three things. And I bought a Fitbit, which tracks my sleep. And I started watching, and I hate this, man, I hate this, but I was averaging 3 to 3.5 hours of sleep a night. And I said, okay, I think I'm smart enough that I can get by on 3 to 3.5 hours of sleep a night. And everyone around me is suffering from the result of. Therefore, I owe it to everybody around me to sleep more every night so that I'm in a better place, in a better state of mind, so that I can function properly and better during the day. And I forced myself to change my schedule around so that I would go to bed earlier and I would get up earlier so that I then could exercise, holding myself accountable to the exercise, and then holding myself responsible for what I consume. Because I was eating a lot of junk food and I didn't realize it. It was like a little snack here of this, a little bite of this, and whatever. And I stopped snacking altogether. I started intermittent fasting. I stopped snacking. I stopped eating between meals. I started going to bed earlier at night. Oh my goodness, my world changed. And a lot of the conflict that I was just facing on a regular basis that had become my norm slowed down. And I was able to kind of look at it from an objective perspective and say, hey, I choose not to live that way anymore. Because in the past, I was waking up in the night and I was really stressed out. My mind was like racing and I was trying to figure out problems from the day. But my mind and my body weren't in sync. And because they weren't in sync, I was waking up during the night really stressed out. And again, it was conflict that I had created. I'd allowed that into my life by silly choices that I'd made. And once I changed the choices and I really became responsible for my own choices, I was able to reduce some of the conflict at kind of a granular level where I said, okay, my head is in the right place, my body's in the right place, I've had plenty of rest and plenty of nutrition, and I've exercised, and I've got oxygen and endorphins and everything going through my brain now. I'm now in a better position to make decisions about my company, about my home, about my family that were, everybody around me was being affected by those weird happenstances that I myself caused. I find I'm my own worst enemy. I'm the one that's creating the conflict, you know?
absolutely. And the point that you bring up is a good one, in that we tend to say a lot of things without meaning. And if we actually sit down with ourselves and say, I'm going to make some resolutions for this new year, but everything that I list on this list, I'm going to do. I'm going to prove to myself that I can be disciplined, that I can be consistent, that I can develop the traits that will actually produce the end result that I'm trying to accomplish. And if we make our resolutions with a lot more thought and a lot more commitment and a lot more carefully than we do, then we would have a different result. There's a law called cause and effect.
Mhm.
And whenever we're experiencing an effect, it's usually, well, it can be dissatisfaction or it could be anything negative. It's caused by something. And if we don't deal with the cause, we're always going to have the same effect. Someone once said, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always be where you've always been.
But it's
So
like that kitchen renovation you did when you said, "I wanna move the kitchen cupboards higher." In order to move them higher, you had to take the cabinets down. And when you took the cabinets down and you were moving the sink up, you then had to change the plumbing. And I think that is true of the resolutions that we make. If you say, I'm going to get up and go to the gym, what does that mean? That means I have to go to bed earlier. And if I'm going to bed earlier, what does that mean? That means you have to cut off your work day at an earlier time so that you can get in dinner and you can do all the evening routines so that you can go to bed earlier, so that you can get up earlier, so that you can meditate in the morning and do all the other stuff. And I think there's a domino effect where you just can't say, I'm going to change, and you change one domino, it doesn't have a rippling effect. But if you change all the dominoes in the lineup, it changes the pattern of where you're headed.
absolutely. And we need to ask ourselves the questions, if you're going to change your schedule, for example, how is that going to impact the people around you? If you're a member of a family, it's going to change the way that family interacts with you. And it may be that the whole family needs to go to bed earlier because you can't go to bed and sleep if televisions are blurring or internet is on and people playing games or whatever it might be. So you need to be able to work together and plan together. Uh, in our home growing up, we had a lot of family councils where we tried to bring all the people together. Sometimes every day we would have a council meeting and say, this is what's going on today. These are the plans. This is what we expect everyone to do. These are the job assignments. All of these things have to take place. Again, the more clearly and specifically you can communicate what has to happen, the more everybody's on board with the same program, the less conflict you're going to have. And there's some people who just simply have some really bad habits. There's some addictive substances that they feel that that's an important aspect of their life, but that has an effect. It has an effect on the person and on the family and on a lot of different things. So we need to be able to sit down and look at ourselves and say, if I want to participate in this thing that is addictive, how does it really impact my life? People who have this addiction that I have, what do they look like when they're in their 70s and 80s? Are they vibrant, productive people, or are they sickly people? In fact, if you look at the shopping carts in supermarkets, look at what's in the cart and look at the people pushing the carts. And you'll see that there are some people whose carts are full of vegetables and potatoes and carrots and cabbages and beets and all different kinds of things that are really quite nutritious. And other people have canned goods and packaged goods and soda pop and all kinds of things that you look at the person and you look at the cart. The younger the people are, the better they will look because those things haven't had their opportunity to destroy your body yet. But there is a cause and an effect. And if you're taking things knowingly into your body that are bad for your health, that cause is going to produce an effect that is not consistent with your ultimate objective to be healthy and strong and vibrant.
Well, and I hear
So
you saying the domino effect of the addiction and it's a really serious thing that you're bringing up here, and I don't want to let it slip by. But if we have conflict in our lives, and in order to mask the pain of the conflict, we drink wine or alcohol or do drugs or whatever the addictions are, eat comfort foods and packaged foods or whatever it is. If we are covering the pain of that conflict with junk food, like you said, the addictions are real and the side effects are real and the cause and effects are real. And now we have more conflict as a result of trying to bury the conflict in the first place instead of resolving it. And so eating comfort foods and caving into addictions is not the solution to resolving conflicts in our lives. And I think that's a really important message. And I'm really glad that you brought it up. Because if we are just masking the pain, oh, hey, I got conflict in my life, I'm going to hide it. Then what happens is the cause and effect of that is even bigger. And we have a domino effect that goes down that way until we wake up one day and we're like, everything is out of control. And I feel completely helpless in every area of my life. And I've seen people like that where they're so confused and they're so conflicted, they don't know where to start and they feel paralyzed.
Yeah, and there are other things along the same vein. For example, if you're a lazy person, you're actually producing future conflict because things that need to be done on a timely basis are not done. And you're going to be arguing with people, or you're going to be late on your scheduling or on the work that you're required to do. You'll fall flat on your responsibilities. And another thing is procrastination. If you let things pile up and you don't get things done, uh, we had an example of a family that I know that everyone in the family hated to do dishes. And so they would just put the dishes in the sink until there weren't any more dishes available. And then when you do dishes that way, the food crusts on the dishes and the job itself becomes more difficult.
Mhm.
Whereas if you get up from a meal and swish the dishes off and put them in the dishwasher and away you go, life is just a lot smoother and you don't have the conflict. Otherwise, you're just embroiled in conflict all of the time, just day after day after day over the same issues. Which brings us to another thing, which is our habits. Our habits either help us to avoid conflict or they produce conflict. Sometimes our habits are not the best way to do things. Sometimes we've grown up in a situation, we have a certain culture, we do things a certain way, but it's really not the best way to do that. And it impacts the people around us, maybe in negative ways. And sometimes we break our resolutions that we talked about because of our habits. Sometimes instead of making changes that are really needful in our lives, we will fall back into areas where we're comfortable, where we habitually operate in our comfort zone. We don't ever get out there on the front lines and really make changes that would be dynamic and beneficial in our lives. And so we're always conflicted within ourselves because we're living so far below our potential that if we reorganize things and realize that being lazy is not a characteristic that is productive for my life. Having bad habits is not productive for my life. Using addictive substances, that's not productive for my life. We need to put on our big boy pants and make some decisions that are really significant. And then our lives will be dynamically different. We had this big saying hanging up in our kitchen for years that said, daily dynamic transition. You don't want to be tomorrow where you are today. You want to be better. You want to make tomorrow better than it was today. And if we make little tiny changes in our life, little tiny changes in our bedtimes or in the foods that we eat or our exercise programs, they have gargantuan effects later on that will really make our lives different. As you get
Well,
older, you still want to be healthy and strong and viable. You don't want to just live longer on medications and be a grumpy old person that's bedridden and irritable around everyone. You want to be just a really pleasant, loving person that people want to be around and interact with.
well, I heard a saying one time that stayed with me, and it goes back to the habits that you mentioned. And the saying was, your habits will expose or promote you. And I've thought about that a lot because over my life, I've chosen habits that as I look at them, I think to myself, is this going to promote me or is this going to expose me? And I'm like, you know what, this is kind of an exposing kind of habit. It's not, this is does not represent the best version of myself. And when I become really honest about those conversations that you're bringing up that we have with ourselves, what kind of person am I becoming? Am I really practicing those foundational principles, or am I kind of taking shortcuts that are going to then kind of like rip off the cover and expose me as a, you know, a lazy bum?
Absolutely. And you can create habits that are really, really beneficial. For example, I can make a decision that I'm not going to become angry.
Mm,
I'm not going to argue with people. I'm not going to fight with people.
mm.
Um, I am going to be a pleasant person who communicates well. That's the kind of person that I'm going to become. And so you work on all of the habits that will make you that person. You need to be able to see yourself as you would really like to be. This is the person that I really am. And these are the habits that will create that person.
And I think when
There's,
you create those boundaries and you're clear about those boundaries, it becomes easier to implement. Because I did that exact thing. I have a personal policy. I don't argue with idiots. I don't. And every time I'm in the middle of a conversation and I just feel like this person is an idiot, it reminds me, wait a second, I don't argue with idiots. This is where I turn and I just walk away because I'm going to lose. There's no winning this particular argument. And
no,
so I don't.
someone said, if you argue with an idiot, after about 1 minute, no one will be able to tell who the idiot is.
There you go.
So anyway, we need to decide how we're going to deal with conflict. Conflict is just a natural part of life. And it begins with ourselves, with our own characteristics, our own traits. And we can decide and conflict doesn't have to be negative. Conflict is just a change. It's a difference. Two people both have a different belief system. How are they going to interact so that that interaction is positive rather than negative? You can resolve conflicts very, very easily by deciding not to make a conflict negative. And if you decide that you will not argue, you will not yell, you will not become agitated, you just make those decisions. Just like, I'm not going to drink alcohol. I made that decision when I was very, very young because of an experience that I saw in someone else's life. And so I said that will never be me. I will never use alcohol. And I have never touched alcohol in any form other than medicinal tinctures. I make like a cayenne pepper tincture with a little bit of alcohol to preserve it. But as far as consuming alcohol, I've never done that in any form. So if we make a decision like that, I'm not going to argue with people. I'm not going to yell at people. I'm not going to fight with people. If something is important to someone to the extent that they want that to be their reality, I will support that, because I prefer peace and tranquility over what that thing would produce for me. And sometimes you have to stand up for your values. Sometimes you have to fight, but you can fight in a way that is very, let's call it sophisticated. For
Mm.
example, if you don't like the way the government is functioning, fight behind the scenes in getting quality people to run for office. Fight behind the scenes by writing letters to your Congress people and saying, this is how I feel about this issue, and I want you to be responsible. I voted for you because of this. And if you go this other way, I will not support you. I will vote against you. And we can fight for things that we believe in constructive ways. We don't have to just glue ourselves to the road or throw paint on paintings and pictures in museums. Just rioting and yelling and screaming, that's not a way to communicate and get anything done. If you want people to follow you, make the pathway pleasurable. People will follow what's pleasurable and what seems just and true, rather than a lot of noise and screaming and beating on your chest and setting things on fire and throwing things at people. That's not a way to be productive in any stretch of the imagination.
Well,
So
and what I hear you saying today, and I think it's really important, is begin with the end in mind. If you know what the end result looks like, you can plan the steps of logic and compassion and patience in between, so that when you deal with that conflict, it's at a responsible and in an educational way that the people around you go, oh, wait a second, that makes sense. I can go along with you for the ride. Instead of you just, like you said, being unrealistic and ballistic and then people going like, whoa, where did that come from? And then they can't take your side because now there are two idiots in the room. And so if we can begin with the end in mind, and we can do this in a logical sense, I think that we can see like, oh, this particular cause and effect is going to create some conflict. And if I'm careful right now in advance, I can prevent that from being a massive event, and it can just be kind of a small event, and it can be manageable.
Yeah, and in line with that too, the smaller the conflict, the easier it is to resolve. And so if we act in a very, very timely way to things that are not going the way we want them to go, it's much easier to resolve that than letting something grow into a real problem that involves a lot of people and a lot of hard feelings, and it just can get into a real bruglio, you know what I mean? So be aware. It's the concept of mindfulness, where you're kind of aware of your surroundings. You're aware of the people around you and what's going on. And if a conflict arises in a difference of opinion, clarify it right in the moment. Don't let things build up until they become real issues. So the quicker you can resolve conflict, the better it is. Small conflicts over large conflicts.
This was a great topic. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have learned so much, and I think this is a phenomenal lesson for business owners, for parents, for teenagers, and for anybody that's just going from point A to point B in life. Learn to resolve the conflicts before they arise. This is good stuff. If you haven't already, please pick up your copy of The Insights and Wisdom of Omuugn. We are going through this week by week. Every Saturday morning, we're meeting with Omuugn to discover some of the interesting insights and wisdom that will help you become a better person, a better leader, and a better manager so that you can be the very best version of yourself. Thanks for joining me today, and we'll see you again next time.
Pleasure. Thank you.